Welcome, Rotarians and guests, to the Rotary Club of Seattle, the fourth oldest and one of the world's largest Rotary clubs, where we embrace service above self and are connecting for good. Today's program celebrates membership. We will introduce a new member. We will observe June membership anniversaries. We will be welcoming the new Consul General from Japan, and we will be saluting all of the Rotarians who have supported our membership initiative this year. And today's main program will explore the topic of implicit bias, what it is and how each of us might better appreciate how it influences our views and our actions. And to set the tone today, offering our invocation is Jeff Gill, who's the rector at Trinity Episcopal Church. Jeff joined our club about 2.5 years ago and jumped right in. He serves on our International Service Committee and on the Peace Builder Committee. He'll offer the invocation, and then immediately following, if you'll remain standing, because David Woodward returns to lead us in song, and Trish Bostrom will accompany him on the banjo. Jeff.
With all that's in the news and on our minds these days about the role of race and class and religious or gender identity and how we are treated by society, and today's focus here on implicit bias at Seattle 4, I thought I'd start by reminding us all of a story from the Christian tradition about implicit bias. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. In it, a man is beaten and robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. Along comes a priest, and of course you expect that a righteous person like that would stop and tend to the traveler's needs. But no, he passes on by. Then along comes a Levite, one who is an assistant to the priests in the temple, and of course you would surely expect him to stop also and help. Not so. And finally along comes a Samaritan. Samaritans were at the very bottom of the social scale in Jesus' day, considered ritually impure and people with whom one did not associate without serious social and spiritual consequences. One might expect that this person would walk right on by. But no, he stops. He tends to the man's wounds, places him on his donkey, and carries him to an inn where he cared for him. The next day he paid the innkeeper to continue caring for him and said he would return to pay whatever other expenses arose for this man. In this little tale, expectations are turned on their heads, both positive ones and negative ones. The ones we think will come to his aid do not, and the one we believe sure would come to his aid does. Normally, the lesson we take from this parable is that we should all be good Samaritans, care for the weak, the hurting, and the vulnerable. And that is all certainly true. But its actual meaning is something different. Jesus tells the parable in response to a question from a lawyer, and that question is, who is my neighbor? To which Jesus responds with this little parable. And the answer is, your neighbor is not the person nearest you, or most like you, or friendly to every thought or quality or opinion that you hold. Your neighbor just might be the very person you would least expect. So do not judge based on appearances, on race, social status, or any other factor. Check your biases, question them, be skeptical of assumptions, and allow yourself to be surprised. Let us pray. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for you make all things good. You have made us and all people in your image, and you call us to live into your love for us and the whole of creation. We beg your mercy and forgiveness for the times we have intentionally or unintentionally allowed ourselves to place different values on people based on the color of their skin, their gender, or their abilities. Help us to look upon one another with the love and acceptance that you have for each one of us. Amen.
Well, I'm eager to get on to our main program. It wasn't that long ago. It was actually just last spring and last summer when we were all shocked by the spike in violence, noticeably police shootings of unarmed citizens, and then the targeting of police by armed citizens. All heartbreaking symptoms of misunderstanding, fear, and bias. Back in October, the Seattle Police Chief, Kathleen O'Toole, addressed us, and she told us about the training that the Seattle Police Department is doing to address implicit bias on the police force. Like many of you, I was intrigued, and so was the Peace Builder Committee. We all wanted to understand the concept and better appreciate how it impacts all of us. So the Peace Builder Committee, ably led by Roberta Nestis and Harold Scoggins, agreed to explore explicit bias in the committee. And over the course of many meetings this winter, they attended trainings, they took an implicit bias assessment, and talked about the issue. And we today have the benefit of this committee's work as they report out. They've arranged for 2 speakers to help get us up to speed. We'll first be briefed on what implicit bias is, and then we'll see how it's being addressed in our Seattle Police Department. And then in a slightly different format than our usual mic Q&A segment, we're going to have an open mic where all of our members are invited to share their experiences and impressions on this topic. But to lead us off, our first guest speaker is Deborah Terry Hayes. She's an international trainer, consultant, facilitator, and scholar with over 30 years of relevant experience in social activism and anti-oppression work. She recently retired as the Senior Director for Organizational Development at Sound Generations. She continues to serve as an auxiliary faculty member at the University of Washington School of Social Work. She uses her expertise and insights in social justice and human development to help organizations make systemic changes. She works with groups to help understand the issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, and other issues affecting marginalized groups. Deborah's work often includes the training of management teams whose leadership and communication styles may not be effective in the current workplace. With a master's degree in social work, as well as a master's degree in human development with a specialization in social and human services, Deborah is well qualified to get us up to speed today. Following Deborah's remarks, Martin Welty is going to step up. Martin has spent 28 years with the Seattle Police Department. He is currently their Race and Social Justice Initiative Coordinator. He has held that position for the past 5 years. He's responsible for all of the department's mandatory training, their required work plans, and all of the administrative reporting functions on this topic. It is Martin's training sessions that our Peace Builder Committee members attended. Martin is a graduate of Eastern Washington University with a degree in finance, economics, and military science. Prior to his work with SPD, Martin worked at the Ford Motor Credit Company and served as an Army officer for 14 years in the United States Army. So let's welcome Deborah and then Martin as we explore implicit bias.
Okay. At 5'1", I think I do need this. My name's Deborah Terry Hayes. There's a couple other things I like to say before I get started. First of all, 10 minutes. I have about 10 minutes to talk about implicit bias, which is, I'll do the best that I can, but it's a deep conversation and subject to talk about. But before I get started, I always like to say that I stand on the shoulders of my parents, who were major civil rights leaders in Seattle. My father was the first African-American male to teach in the Seattle School District, and my mother was the first African-American to graduate from Seattle University's School of Nursing. And I'm blessed to still have both of them in my life. My dad is now almost 91, and my mother is 80. She doesn't like me to tell, but she's 87. Okay. And they're doing well. And then the second thing I want to know, how many people have actually gone online and done an implicit bias test? I just want to get a sense. Okay. There is online, that Harvard University has put implicit bias tests online, so you can Google implicit bias and it should come up. And the test, there's various different groups. So it's race, it's religion, it's many different groups, and you can explore where you are in terms of implicit bias. So, okay. I'm going to do a brief definition, and there's many definitions, but this one in 10 minutes should help us get started on the conversation. So implicit bias is the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So I think the thing, when people start to think about bias, they think about the thoughts that they have, but we're talking about what is unconscious. And to get people away from I'm bad if I have implicit bias and I'm good if I don't, we're going to throw all that good, bad binary stuff out because it's human, and bias is a human phenomena. So it makes us human. Also, in some circles, it's known as social cognition, and everybody harbors both implicit bias and social cognition. In businesses and in the workplace, it affects who gets hired, who gets promoted, how your performance review goes, who are your clients, our customers, and consumers. It affects where we live, who we socialize with, and some social scientists have said there are about 150 identified unconscious or implicit biases that involve some sort of socialization, which makes it really difficult to take it on in uprooting it and addressing it. It's just kind of overwhelming when we think of it in that way. Okay. Implicit biases encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily without an individual's awareness or intentional control, and it resides deep in the subconscious. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. It causes us to have feelings, attitudes about other people based on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, age and appearance, weight, height, introversion versus extroversion, marital status, parental status, physical abilities, and so on. And there was a study done on implicit biases, and I'll talk about a couple of them. One was that this was done on women and blonde women, and their salaries were 7% higher than other women's salaries. And then for every 1% increase in body mass, 6% decrease in family income. That kind of startled me a bit when I read that. And Yale University studied male and female scientists trained to reject the subjectivity, and but still were more likely to hire men, rank them higher in competency than women, and pay them $4,000 more per year than women. So, and then the last thing I'll say is that 58% of Fortune 500 CEOs are about 6 feet tall. Okay, so there's something happening there, right? Okay, some characteristics of implicit bias. Okay, I'm not having my little thing over here, so I have to kind of look around. Implicit bias characteristics are pervasive, related specifically to mental constructs. So it's about how is our brain put together. It's rooted in the same region of the brain, and these are all scientifically done. It's rooted in the same region of the brain that's associated with fear and threat. And our brains have evolved to mentally group things together. And there's also a conditional aspect of implicit bias, which is if you have an experience, thank you very much, that's much better. If you have an experience, particularly let's say with a group of people that was less than positive, and you may start to believe that all people that belong to that group are the same. Okay. The implicit associations we hold tend to favor our own group. But the good news is it's malleable, right? And we can unlearn them. I think that's really key. A study found, and I'm using the language of the study because it's not quite how I would explain it. The study was done between 2006 and 2013, and it was the implicit bias for straight people over gay and lesbian people. And that has declined as things have moved forward in the culture around same-sex marriage, those kinds of things. So they see an actual reduction in the bias toward people who identify as gay and lesbian. So things can change, and I find that very hopeful. So I kind of laid it out in a very general way, what it is and how it happens, but how do we begin to reduce it? And so here's a few key things about reducing implicit bias. The first thing is, and I put the word positive in quotes, notice positive examples of people who are different than you. And I say, put positive in quotes because positive is, what's a positive and negative experience are also socially constructed and are part of the culture. So something might be positive for one group of people and not positive for another group of people. Implement intentionality. And I say you kind of have to hold your finger to the fire on this. You can't make a decision and think it's all going to happen without any intentionality on it. So the intentionality first is to become aware, and then the second is be emotionally honest with yourself about how you are experiencing things. I think we all tend to not really think about emotional honesty that much. But it's one of those things, particularly here in polite Seattle, somebody might ask you, how are you? And we just answer fine. And emotionally we're not doing fine, or physically we're not doing fine. So I say when you're looking at bias, you need to have emotional honesty with yourself. Increase your contact with people who are different from you. I talk about in the kitchen relationships versus in the living room relationships. In my house, when I grew up, people that were invited into the kitchen, that's where the real conversations happened, the food was happening, people were crying, laughing, telling stories. And when my parents would invite people over that went into the living room, it was kind of like, what is wrong with these people? My parents are like out of body, and we're using good china, and we had to clean up. It's not authentic. Right? So build those authentic relationships with people who are different from you, and then participate in interactive training. So for some of you, you can check that off as this little episode that we're doing right now is the beginning of that interactive training. And then begin to really understand how biases work. If I had more time, I would be talking about what I call agent developmental skills. And an agent is somebody, when we're looking at systems of oppression, who benefits from it in society. So in developmental skills, you kind of start after you get beyond denying that there's anything going on. You become aware. And from that awareness, you need to build allyship skills. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about that, I can talk to you more about that after we're done here. So again, to shift attitudes, we need to also have those authentic relationships and hear the stories of people. As I'm an African American woman, as you probably could tell, and when I have white friends, if they aren't asking me what life is like for me as an African American and not listening to my stories of how I've experienced discrimination, you can bet that the relationship is not authentic. Okay, so with that, I'm going to let Martin come up and talk a little bit more about implicit bias and give us more concrete examples.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am tall enough I can move the little box a little bit here. So, first of all, President Gibson, I would like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come here. Roberta Nestis was, in fact, one of the members that came to observe some of the training that we do at Seattle Police Department. And so I'd like to thank her, too. This is an honor and a privilege to be here. Well, let me jump in. As Deborah mentioned, implicit bias is a pretty in-depth thing. More than a 20-minute presentation can handle. But what we have done at the Seattle Police Department, I have been involved as a trainer for about 10 or 11 years, and in the last 5 years specifically around this race and social justice initiative that the city of Seattle has. And in the training that I put together and execute, the minimal amount of training time has been a 4-hour block of instruction. So you can tell that, again, a 20-minute quick down and dirty session really isn't going to encapsulate all of the kinds of conceptual stuff that you saw Deborah present. But what I would like to do is just piggyback from that. In a moment, I'm going to show you a video. Some of you may have seen it, but it really illustrates what this implicit bias, this subconscious thing that we have that makes us all humans, what it kind of looks like and how it can kind of maturate itself in our personalities. I will let you know that I have, you guys are a great audience, although I've only been up here for a couple minutes. Let me tell you why. I deal with police officers all the time, and we can be a horrible audience. We huff and puff and start reading things and have every excuse to get up and leave the room whenever we have training, especially when we have training that requires the cognitive part of our brains. A lot of the training that I also am responsible for is, police in general are trained how to actually do focus skill things, like drive a car, like how to defend ourselves, how to use different weapon systems. We don't do a whole lot of training on the cognitive kinds of things, like how do we communicate with people? What does bias look like, and how does it impact the jobs we do in the communities in which we serve? And that has been a big focus that I've been trying to get our department to look at, the fact of actually engaging our men and women on the department in a more cognitive way around some of these skills that really can make a difference and be something that's a little more transformational in the communities in which we serve. One of the examples, and I'm gonna throw my captain under the bridge here a little bit, because you may have seen when Deborah mentioned that executive males are at least 6 feet tall or taller, and he's shaking his head again, yes, and he was doing that, and that is a very real thing. I'm sure our captain could talk about issues that he has had probably within his military career, if for no other reason, based on his particular height, and how people view him as a leader and as a captain serving in our country, right? So I thank you, sir, for your service. I know what that is like. I had a little 14-year commitment myself. Anyway, having said that, let us go ahead and, if we can, fire up our video. The video is 11 minutes long. We're only going to see about 6.5 minutes of it, but just watch what happens. It's an interesting video. It is more interesting than this.
You see this and you wonder, did he lose his keys or is he blatantly stealing that bike? In broad daylight, he hammers and then saws on the chain. When that doesn't work, he pulls out an industrial-sized bolt cutter. And when he's asked, he fesses up.
Have you lost the law?
No, not exactly.
But he's not a real thief. Justin Kelly is an actor, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
What happened? Nothing. I can't get through the lock. I mean, I know it's weird, but you wouldn't happen to know whose bike this is.
Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you.
While the scene troubles Tim Lucas enough to turn around for a second look, he's in a family outing. His wife looks alarmed too, but they both move on.
Colleen, my wife, she's like, he's totally stealing that bike. She was like, call the cops.
It turns out Lucas is a pastor, but our thief's confession is safe with him.
It was odd that somebody had all that equipment.
But you didn't do anything.
No.
That's true.
That's the bottom line.
Lots of people stop and stare. A few even question the actor.
I guess I have to ask, is that your bike?
I guess technically no.
Okay.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
When no one tries to stop our thief, he ratchets it up a notch with an electric saw, even putting on a pair of goggles. That finally catches the attention of Arlene Menard and her husband George.
You're not stealing, right?
No, why? It's not your bike, is it?
I just want to know if it's your bike.
No, it's not my bike, but it's not yours. What do you care?
It may be next time.
Well.
If it's not yours, I'll just let somebody know.
As Arlene sets off to find help, we decide to clue the couple in on our experiment.
I think most people don't want to get involved in a situation like this, and so they just pass it by.
George is right. In over an hour, about 100 people pass by. Only George and Arlene try to stop him. Some tell us they plan to call the police later. Others say they're scared. Keep moving. This woman and her friends give our thief the benefit of the doubt. When we ask why, Bisa Washington tells us first impressions matter.
I remember thinking young white men don't usually carry burglary tools.
So we all make
That-
assumptions, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he works for the park, and our thoughts were if he'd been black or a person of color, the police would have been called in immediately.
We're going to do that experiment with an African-American kid. What do you think's going to happen?
And I think people will be very distressed.
I think someone's gonna whip out their cell phone and call the park police.
Will they? We replace our white thief with this young man, Matlock. Remember, both actors dress in a similar way and are about the same age.
Is that your bike?
Nah.
Then what do you cut the chain for?
Right away. Right away, somebody yelled. Wow. Within seconds, another person confronts our thief.
Is that your bike? Technically, it's not, but it's gonna be mine.
More people converge.
We only took one cell phone. You call the police. He's like stealing somebody's bike.
Are you taking that bike? Is that your bike?
No, it's not, sir.
Oh, why are you doing that?
Is this any of y'all bikes? Is this your bike?
It's not, it belongs
No, but
whoever's it is. It belongs to someone.
To who?
Well, not to you.
And sure enough, one man whips out a cell phone to call 911.
There's someone up to taking a bike here.
Our actor triggers more reaction. Some people are even snapping pictures for evidence.
I got you, bud. I got you.
Guy's stealing a bike. Whose bike's over here?
Once everyone moves away, we reset our cameras, and within minutes, another outraged man is yelling.
Are you trying to steal that bike?
Excuse me, sir, but the bike's been here for days. Like, no one's gonna take it.
Well, that's not your bike then.
Yeah.
You can't just come in and take something from somebody.
Excuse me, sir. I'm
Okay, I'll just take your tools away then. You sure, sir?
Please, sir, don't touch my stuff, sir. Please, sir, do not touch my
Well,
stuff.
you're
Please.
touching somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, all right, but this has been here. Like, who's gonna take it?
Well, that doesn't make it your property.
Technically, it does.
No, it doesn't technically. It's not yours to take.
All right, sir.
When we bring out our cameras, David Robb wants us to go after the thief.
That kid in the red shirt. He's hacking away on a bike that's not his. And he has a right to take it and steal it. And he's come here with tools, obviously.
You know, sir, my name is John Quinones, and this is part of a TV show called What Would You Do? You were pretty upset.
I was.
It's important that we speak up in these situations.
I think so. It just seemed like the right thing to do.
Everyone insists that justice is colorblind.
Did the race of the culprit have anything to do with it?
Not at all. He could have been any color. It wouldn't have mattered to me.
I think it was taking a bike that wasn't his, not what his color was.
Maybe, but take another look at how people passed right by the white actor,
I need the police department,
but not the black actor. Matlock sits nearby, stunned by what just happened.
These racial stereotypes are infused in all of us. I mean, it's part of our culture. So whether you're black or white, you associate crime with blacks and you associate whites with being good.
Jack DeVideo, psychology professor at Yale University.
Whether we believe it, whether we notice it, whether we acknowledge it, race is affecting what I see, what I think, what I do.
DeVideo says we all seize openings to reassure ourselves that we're not biased.
Lost your key?
Yeah, I actually had to leave my key.
So when given an opening like this lost key explanation, people may respond kindly. Challenging the actor might come off as racist.
So I get the back, you get the front.
Yeah, good luck to you.
Thank you, sir.
But when we come back, you won't believe what happens when our thief is not a guy, but a woman. This woman. Remember our other bike thieves? The white actor barely causes a second glance. Our black actor draws angry crowds. And with Ashley, well, take a look.
Need a hand with that? Need a hand?
You don't know whose this is, do you?
Whose bike it is?
Yeah.
Why, are you trying to steal someone's bike?
With a little help from Ed Fitzsimmons, the bike chain easily falls away.
Yup, everywhere. Oh my goodness, what a strong man you are.
Oh, yeah.
It all happens as his friend stands nearby watching.
The video goes on. By the laughter, you can kind of tell that there's a different outcome when men are interacting with women. Our doctor will come back on in the video and say that we as men actually act irrational when it comes to women. Imagine that. So you can see the impacts that this all has. So hopefully you enjoyed just a little bit of a taste of this. And if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything afterwards, I'll be around a little bit, so just locate me. And thank you again for allowing me this opportunity.
So as I mentioned at the outset, we're going to have an open mic on the floor. So I'm going to ask the mic handlers to get up. And this is an opportunity for us as members to share our impressions. So do we have someone who'd like to get started? Roberta.
Sure, we'll start over here. I actually asked if I could go first. First, because I wanted to, on behalf of the Peace Builder Committee, I wanted to thank our two speakers. I've been to both of Martin's training, and I highly recommend them. And then Deborah and I had a wonderful get-acquainted conversation in where else in Seattle but a Starbucks. So I took the implicit bias test, and I did not like the results. I was sort of discouraged and unhappy with myself. And I took one on race, and I took one on gender. And with the race one, I thought, gosh, you know, I've really been intentionally working on, you know, my white privilege, and so I still have bias. And then also on the one on gender, thinking, I mean, I'm a lifelong feminist, and I've actually experienced explicit bias as a woman CEO. So I was not very happy, and then I reflected. I calmed down. I reflected, and I realized that I started to notice things. For example, let's say if my good friend Laurel here said that she had an appointment with I don't know, an orthopedic surgeon. I'm not wishing anything bad here. I would first think male. And this really irritates me, that my mind works this way. So it's subconscious, just like you say. But I've found through this whole exercise that, well, I guess they say you can't teach old dog Nuke's tricks, but me, can learn a lot about my biases and try to be more intentional about change. So thank you again.
I think we had one mic.
Well, let me just say that I attended the class that Officer Welty did, and it was a remarkable experience for me. It was 4 hours. I'd never been in a room with 10 or 15 police officers before. But they were all just very pleasant, very curious, and really were interested in what Officer Welty had to say. So what I did is I I pulled some outtakes from that session that I'd like to share with you, and then I may put you on the spot. But my first outtake was the disconnect between the police department and the public. And that stems from the fact that the police department does a lousy job of PR. The second is working on police legitimacy and procedural justice. So a topic that Officer Welty really focused on with the officers in the room, and I just tell you that I think they were all attentive, and so was I, and so was Ken Calling. In human psychology, Officer Welty talked about how we are treated is more important than outcomes. It's kind of like how we interact with one another. And that biases change when we have facts that are contrary to assumptions, which I think is one of your major themes. An interesting one, tough is what we do, not what we are. And the last one, and the most important one, the goal at the end of the day is to go home alive. A very, very complicated and challenging job these officers have. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Officer Welty to explain to us the schema and a situational situation where if an officer saw 4 black, Hispanic, or Asian young men in a jacked up Impala on Sunday morning with a broken taillight, how does the officer deal with that situation? In exercising a lot of caution, I suppose. Am I putting you on the spot?
Oh, you are. Yeah, good. A lot of pressure. Wow. Well, there's a lot of things that are going on with that. If I'm hearing your question correctly, if I were asked that question in training, what I'm going to respond is that there are all kinds of subconscious things that are going through officers' minds, as any human being's mind, in that particular situation. From the actual vehicle itself, we make stereotypical inferences by materialistic things, somebody's car. If you saw the rest of this video, our doctor talks about that if you are attractive, that attractive things are denoted as being good things. That's with anything. You see a really nice car go by, we make all kinds of assumptions about what that person in the car, without ever seeing them, oh, they must have a really good job. They make a lot of money. They can afford something like that. And then the inverse is true. Some car that's beat up, that's not as nice, drives by, and we make a lot of inferences about that without ever seeing the people that are inside of the vehicle. So we really try to address all of those aspects of just how the human brain works. And when you mentioned schema, just very quickly, schema is this really neat word that just has to do with how our brain actually processes stuff around making shortcuts to categorize things. And we actually have to do that because it's actually called safety. All humans process it that way. Back in early man didn't have enough time to see other man and say, hey, let me get to know him to make a determination whether he's a nice guy or not. I had to do some things this quickly to decide, do I fight him? Is he friend, or do I need to run from him? And we don't have time to go to the cognitive part of our brain and process all that, because by the time I'm trying to figure that out, he might already be beating me up, right? Doing something that I don't like. So that's a very simplistic way of talking about the schema. I hope that answered it very quickly for you.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry that we've run out of time. But what I'd like to do is thank the Peace Builder Committee and invite everyone to attend the next Peace Builder Committee meeting. It's the last Wednesday of the month, just ahead of our lunch meeting. And perhaps we can allocate time during that committee meeting to continue the conversation and, as it were, have an open mic. I want to just back up on one slide, because the open mic slide, if you can just back up, there should be a link to the, is it there? There should be a link to this Harvard bias assessment if anyone would like to take it in light of the conversation. In any event, we'll make sure it gets into the totem. It obviously didn't get onto the slides today. So in closing, I also want to add my thanks to Martin and to Deborah for helping us begin to understand and appreciate this topic. I want to welcome the Consul General. We're delighted to have you in Seattle, sir, Jiro, and look forward to seeing you in Atlanta. I also want to welcome Howard, our newest member, and I'm going to invite you to go to the door so we can all greet you as we leave today, and welcome to Seattle 4 right now. Yes, that's an invitation, not a command. That's an invitation. A directive. Okay, there we go. And in the wrap up here, my call to action is, let's see if we can be a little bit more intentional around our own biases and approach the world with an open heart and be good Rotarians as we are citizens of the world. So we're adjourned until next week.